All right. Welcome back, everybody. We are live and going over our senior capstone project, going over what we've gone over before. This is the eighth global goal, decent work and economic growth. Target 8.6, which is promoting youth in employment, education, and training. And today we are going to continue the interview with Paula. We have a couple other questions and answers that we want to react to. So, um, my name is Thomas. I'll introduce myself and then you guys introduce yourself.
Joe Brewington.
Alan Brea, back with another one.
And we will get started here. So, previously, the first part of this interview was on our last upload. So this is part two of the interview with Paula. So we will continue this now. Joe, whenever you're ready, you can play the interview.
Yes, sir. What advice would you give a young student's parents to prepare them for either a vocational job, say like a trade, or secondary education? Did you have any experience with, like, you saw somebody and maybe they were good with their hands and they were good at creating things, but they weren't really, ready for college or ready for high school and that advanced kind of, because I know you've had, a mixture of different ethnicities and intelligence levels, all, teaching as long as you did. But do you have specific advice that you give a kid who just came up to you and said, Mr. McQuillan, I want to be a plumber like my dad. I don't want to go to college,
Well, I was really lucky because my brothers were in the trades, and masons and tile setters, and they worked with their hands. So I was kind of aware of what was available through unions and what was available for training. And Hillsborough County actually has a school, and I forget the name of it now, but they actually have a school for the trades. And I think that was it.
Yeah.
No, not Tampere Bay Tech, but that's one of them. No, this is a different one. In fact, they had actually a Ford asset program at this one, and I cannot think of it for the life of me.
Yeah, my plumber buddy was telling me about that. Like, you can learn.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the school, but it's run by the Hillsborough County, the school system.
I can look it up.
And
Good. That's a good.
yeah, and they have the Ford asset programs out there, and they had florist stuff. They had all kinds of trade stuff.
It's called. Well, hold on. It's called Ford, like the car.
Well, Ford asset, yeah. That was part of the program. They were one of the supported part of the program. In other words, they gave money to that program within that school. I wish I could remember the name of the school, but and it's still in existence.
I
But
can look it up.
yeah. But my point being that if the kid was, especially if he knew exactly what he wanted to do, say his parents were masons or something like that.
Yeah.
I would say, there's this school that you might want to visit where they, and these are high school students, you can defer to go to to this school instead of the high school. I said, maybe your parents can take you, or here's the address, or, if your parents agree to it, I can take you out there. And I did that periodically and take a kid out there to observe.
Interesting.
Or to a local, say it was even a gas station, they wanted to be a mechanic. Meet me at, I could forget the gas station that was near Leona where I lived. Meet me there.
McCollum Brothers or whatever.
Yeah. And you can talk. And I would ask Dick, I say, you have about 10 minutes to talk to a kid. So I like to do that kind of stuff. And the kids that were bussed in, from the poorer areas, financially, I would find out what was there locally. Say they wanted to be a barber, and we'd go to a barber shop and we'd talk, and also that place that I'm telling you about with the Ford asset programs, they had barbers and beautician work, training. That was really cool. Yeah, that was a really neat school.
So the school, just for everyone's knowledge, she was talking about Irwin Technical College, which I will provide a link on the comment section once we post our podcast. but it is a Hillsborough County public school, and Irwin Tech actually does teach vocational skills. They do automotive, they do culinary, they do barbering, they do construction technologies, cloud and computer and virtualization, computer systems information technology, cosmetology, dental assistants, drafting. I mean, there's all kinds of vocations there. So I thought that was a really good point that she made, where, and especially when she took the extra step, right, to take the kid to a garage or take the kid, to later on in the interview, you'll hear that she took a kid to a union meeting. Like these, she's actually taking an active role into these kids' lives and encouraging something outside of college education.
Yeah, that's huge because I think, not everyone likes the format or the way that traditional school is. And kind of having that other option out there, which is still education and still providing a future and a route where you weren't knowledgeable of it before, but now you are knowledgeable of it, so you can be like, oh wow, might be something I want to do in my future. And getting that started at a young age, it's still a form of education, even though it's not through your traditional public high school, public
Right.
middle school, or even private, whatever it is. It's something different because, let's face it, public school isn't for everyone, so having different options for education it's great. It gives a wide variety of where, kids can take their future.
And the big thing, excuse me, Alan, the big thing with this, especially with Irwin Tech, it is a public school, and you can actually go there and have the state of Florida pay for your kid to be educated into a vocation. It's not something where you'd actually have to take out a student loan or, have to take out a, whatever personal loan to pay for the education. It's something that our taxes pay for. So I think it's a good thing for anyone who may be struggling financially, to have a good segue into a vocation. Remember in the first podcast when we were talking about vocational work, my plumber friend was saying that he'd rather hire somebody who came out of a vocational school than somebody who learned on the job. He thought it was important that they got that base knowledge. So I think this is a good kind of way for someone who maybe wants to learn a trade but doesn't have the means to pay for it, right? So I think that's a good thing.
No, absolutely. I think that there's value in being in the know, right? So she had mentioned having brothers that were in trade, so she was already aware of those possibilities. I feel like so many students and people just in general aren't aware of the variations of opportunities that we have in front of us. So I think just having that knowledge and being in the know of what's going on around you plays into your potential and the opportunities that you have, So I think that's major. And I think it's important to have teachers that have that knowledge to share the wealth, with the students. So.
Yeah, and her brothers were both she's from like the New Jersey, New York area, and they had Mason unions. And this is kind of a good segue to the next segment, is that she was talking about maybe taking them to a union meeting. Do you want me to play that real quick, Thomas, or do you have another thought on
Yeah.
this before I do? Okay, let me play that
Go
real
ahead.
quick.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but I also would, like I said, I also might take them like to a union meeting if there was a union, office near there,
Yeah.
and ask them if they would allow me to bring a guest, to just come visit, so they could see, the adults and how the unions were doing. Because, there's such a different, we're a right to work state. So there's such a difference in union, scale and, regular. So I just wanted them to get a good taste of it. It took time, but I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed it a lot doing that.
And I think it was important that she said something really quick there that I don't know if you guys heard it, but she's like, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing that. And I think that's important, because that shows her involvement with the education of the youth, right? And she didn't have, because some teachers would be like college, 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 college. And she was just like individual. Like if this person showed an interest, she would encourage that interest, which I think is huge. And I think it's important for our youth to be pushed in the way that they enjoy, Like if they're showing an interest in something, push them towards that and say and encourage it. Like if I'm showing an interest in college and an interest in wanting to go to college, great. But if I'm showing an interest in mechanics, she took them to a gas station. She was talking about where she lived in South Tampa. There was actually some brothers that owned a mechanic shop, literally like 2 blocks away from her house, and she'd have them work on her car all the time. And she would bring kids in to talk to the mechanic, the owner of the mechanic shop, and he would take time and talk to him a little bit. And then just then you heard about the union segments, where she would take people to the local unions in Florida, which is a little different than say like New York and New Jersey, because we are a right to work state. So the unions don't have as much power as they do up north. But I thought that was important to hear about how she's encouraging one way or another. Like whatever the kid's interested in, you're encouraging that. And I think that's important to hear.
She had mentioned last pod too, just to put it in short, like tapping into their curiosity. So whatever signs that she sees from them early, she just kind of like, okay, we're going to ride that out then and see where it takes you. And that's huge.
Precisely. Yeah, and I agree.
Yeah, I think further on that too, when you have someone supporting you, like your teacher, who, I mean, the biggest thing when you're a kid is support. If you don't have people supporting you or believing in you, it kind of diminishes whatever dream you have. So, kind of being able to dream big or just dream for whatever future you want, and having those supporters, having people believe in you to, kind of go that route and be successful, that's really important because I know that, like, when you're a kid, your future outlook is kind of fragile based off of other people's reactions. If you tell someone, "Hey, this is what I want in the future," and they shut it down, you're gonna not, be as
Pursue it.
motivated.
Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
I agree with that 100%. And I think that some of the biggest success stories are the ones where that person is being supported. And it doesn't necessarily have to be parents. It could be teachers. It could be friends and relatives. But if their thoughts and passions are being supported, they're going to be more likely to pursue those passions, right? And be successful because they feel like, hey, this is something, it feels good, right? We're human. So if something feels bad, you're not going to pursue it. You're going to stop whatever makes you feel bad. So I think that's a very valid point.
Agreed.
Yeah. Is there one other question we have from the interview?
Yeah, there's one more segment. This one's a little bit longer. I'll
Sweet.
go ahead and throw that out there. Hang on, guys.
Perfect.
Did you ever notice the difference between the students, the parents that pursued a college education versus the parents that didn't, and like how they handled their kids? Was there a pattern there, or did you think? I mean, I know we kind of talked about that, where some of them were a little scared to come in because maybe they weren't as educated as you.
Oh yeah.
Intimidated.
Oh sure. Yeah. I didn't have that problem too much because I was, and a lot of teachers didn't like me for this. I actually made home visits still, or calls, or maybe drive a kid home, or I tutored over. Well, to give you an example, to make parents much more comfortable that I did not, were weary of feeling, like they were not as good as, the teacher or whatever.
Right.
I did tutoring after school in the at the Buston students where they were living in not condos, in apartment complexes, and tough areas. And so eventually, a parent would offer their kitchen, and I would invite students from Madison and Monroe, or even the tougher schools, and the students that were bused into Coleman, into our school, and I would tutor there. Okay, so I got the trust of the parents, whether they were parents that were, the mothers that were stay at home and they were, producing kids over and over again, or whether they were, drug people in the premises, that were just waiting to sell.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of trust that way. Takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And a lot of teachers knew that, and that I did that kind of work. But I got that actually from my mother. So if you talk about where you get some of that stuff from, as you just said, my mother was not well educated, but she loved to, we used to call her Eleanor Roosevelt. She loved to go into the schools, and because she could read and sew, and she would teach, and she would take me with her very young. So I talking about picking up stuff from parents.
Yeah.
Okay, and my mother was not a well-educated person, but she had that side of her that um, she was going to lift other people up. So it takes effort, and I'm not saying anybody else is more better or not as
No,
good
I
as me.
understand.
That wasn't
But
the
that's
point.
work.
The point was it was just a unique.
Style.
I knew that I had a style, and I knew that it was unique, and what I was trying to, and it's exactly what I wanted the kids to know. Guess what? You're unique too,
Right.
and so I
It's go
could
a long
carry.
way as long as you're
Yep,
putting
that
effort in, right?
it is, and I was one person, and maybe but I think it for the parents especially that were not as well educated, they would. I'm telling you what they did when I would go to the apartment complex. They would yell if their kid wasn't there, ready to go, for tutoring. They'd go out into the parking lot and say, "Miss Max here, get your asses home." And they would all come running, to the kitchen because I wasn't going to hit them or, I wasn't
Right.
going to use a belt or anything. But they would, they knew that what was going to happen if they didn't show up.
No, that's right.
And that was not of my concern at the time. Eventually I could talk to some of them about, how they dealt with discipline. But basically most of the kids showed up. And they were, and then they, they were of all ethnicities. And those, I can't remember the complex. It was over by the river. But anyhow,
I know which one you're talking about.
yeah, well, I can't think of the name. It's still there though, and it still has the same makeup.
Yeah.
And I never asked any of the other teachers, to do that. So
Probably they
so anyhow,
saw that and were like, that's too much work. Like
well,
people are like, some people just don't have that work ethic.
well, I'll tell you what it did. If they got into a problem with a student that we had in common, or a student, even if we didn't have them in common, they'd say, "I think it's time for you to see Miss Mac." So they would escort them down to me, and they would shape up. I would just look at them, or I would say, "Just take a break, and I want you to take a break and sit over there for 10 minutes
Yeah.
and think about this." And so, but they knew that I knew the parents. That teacher didn't know the parents. They knew that I knew their parents. They knew that I wasn't necessarily a squealer, but I wasn't going to also, if they continued, keep it from the parents. And that I was not, it was not above me to go drive over there to their apartment, okay, or to a South Tampa
But they
house.
knew Miss Mac wasn't playing.
Yeah, well, South Tampa too, even the people that had money. It was not above me to go to their homes either. So, but it was a little brave of me. I knew that. I'm not stupid. It was a little brave of me to go over to, the heavily more, uh, um, somewhat risky areas.
Yeah.
So, but it did take effort. It's not a matter of tooting my horn. It was just that I knew that it was unique, and the principals knew it too. So they gave me, and I was supported by. I can only think of one that I butted heads with, but it wasn't long, that I butted heads with them. But so so for me, I think it starts really talking uh, as maybe fifth or sixth grade. And if you can get the parents, even if they're not educated, in the traditional way of education, if you can get them talking with their child or exposing them to, watch someone in construction, just even watching them in construction,
Yeah.
or watching the mechanic at the gas station
You
fixing
just
their
don't know
car.
what's going to spin their wheels, right? You just don't.
No, you don't. You don't. And
Yep.
and that, believe it or not, just saying, watch the guy.
So I think that's kind of an important piece there, because it shows the involvement of her as an educator, because she is kind of going above and beyond, and she's kind of stating what she believed it took to get the buy-in of those younger kids who maybe were struggling or had parents that weren't as educated as others and were a little intimidated by coming in and saying a college educated teacher, and they felt like the teacher was going to talk down to them or something like that. Well, she has a really good way of relating to all different types of um, financial backgrounds and ethnical backgrounds. It didn't matter to her, and it doesn't matter to her. And she'll talk. I mean, she's one of those people. My wife always says, you got. She uses her name as a verb. You got Paulid. So when you're in like the public with her, one of her things is that if she's sitting down and she's bored, she'll strike up a conversation with a complete stranger, and by the end of the conversation, they're buds and they're exchanging phone numbers. That's the type of person she is. So it's, I think it says a lot to encouraging, and what we were talking about before, where we're encouraging the kids and their parents to kind of push their kids into either a vocation or something that interests them. And I think exposing them to like construction or mechanics or even a union meeting or what have you. I think it's the positive reinforcement of an idea and being consistent and persistent and reinforcing that idea. It goes a long way and makes a big difference. Even today, I'll go out to eat or something with her, and there are people that come up to her and go, Miss McQuillan, I had you for, science class and blah, blah, blah. And you were so great. You were like my favorite teacher. And to make a mark like that, I think it's extremely important as an educator. It
Yeah,
makes
it's
a big
huge.
difference.
It's huge. People like
Definitely.
her, it really impacts the communities that they're working in, that they're helping. And people, professors, teachers, educators like her should kind of listen to this and be like, wow, like I should start doing this. I should invest in my own students' future. I should invest, like, why wouldn't I do that? I'm trying to teach people. Um,
Exactly.
I think another part is too, like it kind of, in a good way, kind of brings conviction to younger people to start thinking. When you hear someone say, "Oh, like a college professor is gonna come and talk to you for a little bit," like don't feel pressured, but like, hey, like this is gonna be like, okay, what do you think about this? Start brainstorming. Like you don't have to have a plan, but just start thinking about it. Like put it out there, plant that seed.
I think that's important too, but I think also the persistence that she shows is also important for youth. You have to be
Yeah.
persistent. You can't just do it once. You got to do it several times so it sinks in, like you were saying before, planting the seed. But you got to plant the seed and then water it and then fertilize it and then water it again. And you have to continue to do that because some kids just don't care or don't have that interest, and it's not important. But if you continuously pound home the message, eventually it's going to sink in, right?
Yeah,
It's gonna hit somebody. And if you affect one out of every five kids, that's making a difference, you know, that
absolutely.
normally wouldn't have happened. So I think that's important. And it one of the things that I got from that interview was that she took a lot of extracurricular time on her own to help develop these students, which I think bettered her as an educator, but also made her feel better as a person. Like, excuse me, like she was contributing and doing her job. And I think that's kind of what set her apart, in my opinion, from other teachers, was that work that she put in to maybe not necessarily, show any prejudice towards one person or another. If she saw a kid in need, she was going to do whatever she had to do to nurture that, as long as she had access to that kid. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think it's something that maybe future educators can learn from, right? Because
Definitely.
we're definitely struggling with teachers, especially in Hillsborough County. We're struggling to get quality teachers and to pay them right. So for someone to do that, excuse me, for as long as she did it, I think it speaks volumes to her and her character.
For sure. I pulled a quote real quick from the interview. It's really simple, but when she said that she like told one of her students, "You're unique too," I think that's very telling because a previous point I think Joe made about sometimes in education in school, they kind of harp on college, college, college. And sometimes it takes like that right instructor, that right adult to say, hey, like you're unique. Like the things aren't always black and white. Your contributions to society might look different than this person or that person. And it's okay to be unique and just be yourself and don't feel like you're a failure because you didn't choose the college route or you're not fitting within a certain box that people think is the right box to be in. you know?
Right.
So I think it was really dope that she said it. Again, it's super simple, but it stood out to me because that means the world as a kid to hear, you know, you're unique and that's okay. And we can
Yep.
work with that, you know?
Yep.
So
You're special.
that's really dope. Yeah.
It's
Mr. Rogers
important.
used to do that when I was a kid. I don't know if you guys remember. I might be dating I know I'm dating myself now, but they had a show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he would always talk about every kid being unique and encouraging that uniqueness. And I think that's a very important thing because everybody wants to feel important and wants to feel special, especially as a kid. And if you don't make them feel that, then you could develop some really um, bad things mentally, right? Like there's some mental challenges that can occur from neglect and things like that. So if a kid really does feel special, or if they find a mentor or someone who, especially a teacher, who is really showing that and encouraging that uniqueness, I think that's huge because it goes a
Yeah.
long way.
Yeah, it's important because
Yeah.
not only are you investing in them as students, but you're also investing in them as people. Like, what are their interests? What are their talents? What can they use out of their talents, and what are they even interested in? Because if you're teaching one thing and a lot of people aren't interested, it's not as impactful as getting to know people, their interests, and where they can go with that. So, you know, as a teacher, you're obviously teaching students, but also knowing who your students are as people is important. So you can kind of go with the flow
And their
with them.
parents, because
Exactly.
that was another takeaway that I got from this is knowing their parents and finding a way to communicate and get in with the parents, where she was talking about how other teachers would bring their kids, their troubled kids, to their class even if they didn't share, you know, like the same student. They would sometimes bring them to Paula McQuillan's and be like, oh, you're going to go see Miss Mac, and everybody don't want to see Miss Mac because they know she's serious. And that, but
Right.
it was another way for her to reach a kid, and she would, right? And she wouldn't be scared to make that effort. And I think some teachers, and knowing her and knowing the conversations I've had with her over the years, I know that other teachers were kind of like, I don't know if it was jealousy was the right word, but envious of that gift, because not everybody has that gift of communication and reaching kids. And I think that I know she has reached hundreds and hundreds of children that normally would not have been reached or could have been ignored in that system. She made an effort to educate them and to push them to the best of their ability and encourage the good characteristics and build character. And I think that's important too. By building the character of our youth, we're not necessarily producing successful businessmen and women. We're producing successful businessmen and women with character. And I think that's huge because I think that's something that we lack in today's society. I think there's definitely less of it than I remember growing up. And I think our society, especially with social media and those type of things, it encourages lack of character and emphasizes negative kind of behavior and connotation more than it does positive. And you look at blogs nowadays, when somebody disagrees with something on social media, they go off, but they're not polite, they're not understanding. When you go to a public place, they're not polite to you anymore. People cut you off, they're rude, they don't care. And I think that's part of their education, part of growing up and seeing how people interact and having mentors that show you that having character in class is something that you can take into your business, you can take into your life and your professional workforce, and people will respect you. The most successful people that I've known in my life have both. And I think that's an important point too.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think the last point I'll make real quick is just not to tie it into sports again, but I think she does a great job of getting that buy-in. Like she mentioned, like gaining the trust of parents. And I think when everybody's on the same page, teacher, parent, student, it does wonders, like the kind of results that you could get out of a child, you know? And like
Yeah.
same with coaches on a sporting level. Like once you get that buy-in and everybody's trusting this person's motives and this person's
Or winning.
will to do things and how they're getting things done, once you get into that, it's like, okay, the sky's the limit at that point.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think buy-in is a good phrase. It's you have to get their buy-in. You have to get find what motivates them. And I think that's kind of the message that she was portraying throughout the interview, is that if you get that person motivated to something they're interested in and push that interest, they're going to buy in, and they're going to do it unwillingly. Like they just are going to naturally flow towards that energy because it's something they're interested in and like, and they doing it with somebody who they know cares and has their best interest in mind. And I think that's key to the buy-in on being a successful adult. Being a successful adult in the workforce is that having that confidence in yourself and that buy-in and that ability to get others to buy into your knowledge too, right?
Most
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. Yeah, this interview with Paul was great. I think we got a lot of great information out of there, a lot of takeaways we can take from this, and kind of apply it to our lives as students still learning, and kind of to promote this to the youth to kind of get them to see like this is what, your teachers are thinking. This is what their intentions are, and it's really important. So I thoroughly enjoyed this interview with her, and it was great. So any last comments from you guys?
No, just thank you to Paula McQuillan for taking the time to answer all of my questions and be as thorough and as wonderful of a mother-in-law that she is. I love you. Thank you so much. That's my final thought.
Yeah. All right.
Absolutely. No,
Well,
I agree. Thank you, Ms. Paula. She was really insightful. And yeah, it was dope to pick her brain because not many teachers are like her out here. So it's good to see that there's some teachers that take pride in their work and are really making a difference out here.
She's an incredible human being, probably one of the greatest human beings that I've ever known in my life, and has influenced and affected me in ways that I could never imagine. And I mean that in a positive way. I've never. It's been a blessing to me to know someone like that, because she set such a high bar of moral and ethical standards, and is just such a wonderful person and human being, and has done it for so long. To have the discipline to be that way and to affect so many children and so many people's lives in a positive way is an absolute blessing to our world. And I just can't speak enough to her character. And she's just a wonderful human being, and I enjoy her every day. And thank my blessings that I've known someone like that, really. And I couldn't imagine having her as a teacher. I would have loved to have her as a teacher. She'd have probably hated me, but because I was that jock that sat in the back and was like cutting up in class. But anyway, thank you, Paula, and God bless you.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again, Paula, for the interview, and thank you to all who are watching. That is it for this episode, and we will see you guys next time.